Good afternoon, friends. I'm Ed Steinfeld. I'm the director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. I want to welcome you all back to the third and culminating episode of our series this semester, Election 2016 Behind the Scenes. As you all know, because you've attended previous sessions, I assume, our series has really been run by David Korn, Brown class of 81. David is the Washington bureau chief of Mother Jones magazine, and he'd previously been the Washington editor for The Nation. David is the 2012 winner of the George Polk Award in journalism for his political reporting in 2012. And as I'm sure you know, David is also the author of the 2006 bestseller, Hubris, The Inside Story of Spin Scandal and the Selling of the Iraq War. But I especially today want to welcome our special guest, Mara Liasson, who for many of us has really been the voice of this election campaign. Mara, who's a Brown graduate, Brown class of 77, is the national political correspondent for NPR. She focuses on the White House and Congress, but also, as you know, trends extending well beyond Washington, D.C. Mara has covered a total of 7 presidential elections, really beginning in 1992, and for the first 2 Clinton administrations, for the 8 years of the Clinton administration, Mara was the White House correspondent. Mara joined NPR in 1985, and before that she was a radio and television reporter in San Francisco and also Martha's Vineyard. As I said earlier today at a slightly different venue, we're just incredibly fortunate at Brown to have 2 of the era's leading political journalists speak with us today, and we're particularly lucky that they're both Brown grads and part of our broader community. I'm going to turn it over to David, but let me just mention that there are 2 mics up here, and this will be a very interactive session, as it always is with David. So I'd ask you, if you feel like you have a question coming or you want to speak up and offer an opinion, please just come up to the mics and we'll figure out how to work you in. All right, and let me turn it over to you, David. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to Mara for being here. I think the last time I was in this room, I was trying to stay awake while looking at art slides. Hopefully, we'll keep you awake as well. And we're going to talk for a little bit, then we'll go to questions. I will put a premium on getting students to ask questions, okay? And if no student goes up to the microphone, I will call on students. So everybody should think of a question just in case. Okay, so keep that in mind as we talk. So we're going to try to keep this from becoming a grief counseling session. But you are in a state that voted with the majority of Americans. Don't forget that. But I want to start with by asking what might be called a technical question, which is what the F happened? And we talked about this earlier. Yeah. And you mentioned about something that was lacking.
Yeah.
You should tell these people.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say I'm really happy to be here. Obviously, I'm a proud alum. And I'm happy to be here with David because I said to him the other day, every cycle, the most important journalist is named David. Because he got the 47% scoop, and this year David Fahrenhold got all, at the Washington Post, got all of the foundation, the Trump Foundation.
And the Access Hollywood
And the Access Hollywood tape. And the only difference is this David's scoop actually made a difference.
Yes.
And then this year, but this cycle's David's didn't. But anyway, so there's always somebody named David who is the preeminent journalist of the cycle. So wait, what was lacking? I said so many things, what? Oh, yes, okay, right. Okay, I think that what the F happened. First of all, everyone was shocked, including Donald Trump. Don't kid yourself. He was as surprised as anybody. And, you know, it's very hard to explain what happened because what happened was so discombobulating that people's brains are still, you know, having to be rewired to really process it all. But one of the things that I think was a constant in this entire election was a failure of imagination. And the Republican, and the first kind of line of defense was the Republican Party. The Republican establishment could not imagine that Donald Trump would win the nomination. And their approach to him throughout most of the primary was, let's just take 2 aspirin, lie down, and when we get up, he'll be gone. And that never happened. And part of their failure of imagination was that they profoundly misread the base of their party. The establishment of the Republican Party thought that their base was filled with ideologically conservative voters. Wrong. These were people who just felt they were being screwed by immigrants, by trade deals, by this corrupt system, by the media, by the Republican establishment and congressional leadership in Washington, who told them, if you just give us the House and Senate, we'll stop Obama in his tracks, and that never happened. So that they failed. And then, of course, there was a failure of imagination on the part of the Democrats and the media, who modeled, and pollsters who modeled the electorate wrong, because they couldn't imagine that Donald Trump could pull off the kind of, I don't know what you call it in sports or in pool, but the kind of, inside straight strategy that he tried, which was with long-term demographics running against the Republican Party. He managed to eke out one last election, maybe, by pushing the levels of the white vote, the white non-college vote in particular, to heights that most people thought were not possible. He didn't get any higher percentage of the white vote than Mitt Romney, but Mitt Romney got the same percentage of non-college educated whites as Donald Trump did, but Donald Trump ended up with 47% of the electorate, and Mitt Romney ended up with less. Actually, the analogy, let me just correct that. Ronald Reagan got the same percentage of the white non-college vote as Donald Trump, but Ronald Reagan won 59% of the electorate, and Donald Trump got 47. So he pulled something off. He got a bigger chunk of a shrinking slice of the pie. And that was something that none of us could imagine that he was able to do. And the other failure of imagination, I think, was on the part of Hillary Clinton, who, although she won the popular vote, she was the status quo candidate in a change year, and she ran a pretty uncreative status quo campaign where she didn't have the imagination or the creativity to figure out how to provide a kind of overarching message to tie together all of her very commendable individual programs that could speak to all voters, not just the Obama coalition. The kind of list that she would run through, gay rights, women's rights, Black Lives Matter, et cetera. Instead of just slicing and dicing the electorate, she couldn't figure out a kind of hope and change message, or it's the economy stupid, which her husband used, or make America great again. Those are all just big slogans. Now, they don't mean that much if they're not backed up with real substance. She had the substance, she had the lyrics, she didn't have the music,
Now,
what I would say. So anyway.
I agree with all that. I think there was also a failure of imagination in terms of people in the media and
No doubt.
commentators about what Donald Trump could and could not do.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't play by any rules. In fact, that was part of his appeal. I spoke to one of his top people at the very beginning, before when he entered the race, who told me they were banking on the fact that people would look to see him as somewhat of an asshole, a jerk who didn't play by the rules, and they wouldn't care if he was cheated, if he had cheated people, if he had run out on banks, if he had declared bankruptcy, because they wanted someone who would mirror their anger and who would go to Washington and stick it to whoever they didn't like. And that's not someone who plays by the rules. And time again, every time he broke one of the rules, I remember the first time he did this when he attacked John McCain for being a POW. I remember being on MSNBC at the time, and with a bunch of people said, "That's it, he's done for. He's done for." And I just started thinking, I don't think so. I mean, how many people out there really like John McCain? People in Washington like John McCain fine. And time again, whether it was being a birther and promoting a theory that I would call racist, or whether it was mocking someone who's disabled, and all the way up to the Access Hollywood tape when he admitted on tape, it wasn't locker room talk, he bragged about getting away with sexual assault. And at every point we said, and people said, he's done for it. But yet none of that mattered to a sizable chunk of the American electorate.
Even though 66% of Americans told exit pollsters that they didn't think he had the qualifications or the temperament to be president or the judgments, 20% of them voted for him anyway. And the fact that his approval rating right now, it's very early, is still below his vote. In other words, that means that people who voted for him don't approve of him. And why? Because they just want to change, they couldn't stand her, evangelicals, he got 80% of evangelicals who were very focused. It was a transactional thing. They wanted the Supreme Court, and he was the only way to get justices on the Supreme Court who would vote their interest. You know, the most famous thing he said was, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and not lose any votes. And that's pretty much what happened.
Well, he ended up, groping people and not losing votes.
Yeah, but the thing is
yeah.
that he ran a campaign of grievance, and there were a lot of legitimate grievances, legitimate. You know, I think this is also really important. This is not about a bunch of yahoos who were taken in by a con man. Yes, there were white nationalists, and the KKK is celebrating his win. Okay, they're bad. But he understood that there was tremendous resentment at, decades of wage stagnation, the dislocating effects of globalization, deindustrialization, those are not new trends, but they kind of all came to a head this year. Changing demographics, a system that didn't seem to listen to them. All of these things, political correctness run amok. And political correctness is just a proxy for elites who look down on us. That's all that is.
But at the same time, I do think there are some cultural resentments out there that are not addressed through economic or legitimate means. I do think there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with having to press 1 for English and 2 for Spanish. And they just don't like that. And they saw, and what's very hard, and this is what's going to be hard, I think, for the Democratic Party going onward, is teasing out that type of stuff which you can address, maybe even shouldn't address, and will change about eventually demographically with as those people age and die. And things that are economic grievances that can be addressed, and to try to do so in a way within a discourse that is not driven by fear and hate, which is what he did, because while he addressed their grievances, he made empty, hollow promises.
Well, he also channeled their economic grievances in a racial direction. Nobody's ever run a more racial campaign than him. But the Democrats' job is not to address the discomfort of people who feel uncomfortable checking 1 for English and 2 for Spanish. The answer to angry populism is broadly shared prosperity. Now, that's very hard to achieve. It's democratic capitalist countries all over the world are having a real hard time doing it. But when we have more growth, more broadly shared, then it makes it easier to accommodate to changes, because this country is always changing. We had waves of immigration in other parts of our history, and there was tremendous resentment of new immigrants. We've been through this before. We've had populist movements that were based on grievance against those at the bottom, new immigrants and minorities, and those at the top, Wall Street. That's kind of a permanent feature of American populism. And he is a populist. He certainly isn't a traditional Democrat or a conservative. But I do think that the over-reliance on what they call the rising American electorate, or the Obama coalition, was a strategic mistake on the part of the Hillary Clinton campaign. She didn't come up with a message that could speak to everyone, even though she had programs that could more readily address the economic anxiety of some of those Trump voters than Trump does. But the other thing to remember is, Selena Zito, and I can't remember who she works for, but she's another journalist who came up with the phrase, Trump supporters take him seriously but not literally, and his opponents take him literally but not seriously. I think that's kind of an over-exaggeration, but there was something to that. They felt some of the stuff that David just described, would be disqualifying for any other candidate. Well, he doesn't really mean that, or he's just a celebrity, or he's just trash talking, because of course, if you spend your days watching reality TV and you live in a culture where saying that kind of stuff about other people, the culture that I have a 12-year-old son, okay? So, the dissing and the insults, it's like the whole world, you can live in a world of insult comedy 24 hours a day, and then you get kind of numb to it.
And don't forget, professional wrestling.
Yeah, don't forget professional wrestling from which he comes from.
When it came up. And so, but I do think that, the hard thing going forward for us as a nation, despite, in addition to all the racial hatreds and resentments and bigotry that was displayed in this campaign, and misogyny, is trying to figure out how to get back to a discourse when each side can compete aggressively, but not be shouting "lock up" the person on the
Lock
other
her up.
side,
Yeah.
lock her up. I mean, and to have
But only
that,
one side did that
only
this
one
time.
side did that, and it's there's not an equivalence here on all sorts of fronts. There was only one side that played the race card. There was only one side that talked about banning Muslims. There was only one side, that they had to defend a misogynist. And our media system and a lot of us, we're kind of trained to see, well, there are two sides here, and they battle, and they at least play by some idea of a shared set of rules. And it turns out, no, that's not really the case here. And it's not, it's not like even a gunfight and a knife fight. It's like, here's the guy, doesn't matter what he said, his people didn't care whether he was factual or not. And the other side saying, but in paragraph 8 of your speech in line 2, you said 247, but it's really only 118.
Yeah.
Got you there, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it's so,
But what's so
how do you
interesting
have a
is
debate that matters at this stage?
this is really important and hard to answer. But number one, the one thing you do is you don't become a mirror image of him. And Clinton fell into that trap just once when she said basket of deplorables, and boy, did he run with that.
Yeah.
Now, he called everybody a deplorable and worse.
Yeah.
But you can't be a mirror image of Trump. You also have to understand what we're really talking about now, which I think is about first principles. It's about whether our democratic institutions are strong enough and resilient enough to resist what it seems to be his authoritarian impulses. And he doesn't, and to me, that's the question going forward. To have the opposition to Donald Trump become just like Donald Trump would be really sad for democracy. Yeah. But to the extent that he wants to change the libel laws, he wants to control the internet. Remember, he said he wants to shut down parts of the internet, the parts that don't like him, I guess.
He tried to intimidate a federal judge.
Tried to intimidate a federal judge. The way that he believes that he decides who to put in jail. Yeah. The president decides who he should put in jail, who he wants to put in jail. So there's a lot of things to pay attention to, and I think we are now in a debate about first principles and democratic values. And I do think that Donald Trump did not articulate any democratic values during the campaign that he felt were worth defending, certainly not abroad. He only talked about winning. He never talked about kind of America's role in the world as standing up for, freedom and democracy and an independent judiciary and freedom of the press and being the one indispensable nation.
He challenged our own elections.
Yeah, he challenged our own elections, said we were a corrupt system. And so to the extent that he continues along that line, there's going to be a big debate about what democracy means.
Let me ask you, I'd like to look ahead a little bit more about what might happen with Republican or Trump agenda, but just 2 points on the campaign before we move ahead. One is, just to what degree do you think sexism might have played a role? Here was the first woman trying to become president, got a majority of votes, but didn't make it. And what do you think, because a lot of people out there on both sides are always angry at the media, which doesn't really exist. It's a collection of individual, journalistic enterprises. But from where you sat in covering this campaign, and particularly maybe in covering Trump, what were the challenges? What was done right? And what might not have been wrong? So,
all right, two things. Well, the media. Okay, the sexism. First of all, this was an extremely gendered campaign, no doubt about it. He talked about her stamina. He talked about he really resented feminism. Remember, he said men have it so bad we can't say anything. He constantly, Mike Pence, hundreds of times talked about Donald Trump's broad shoulders.
Yes. Over
and over and over again. And he ran as a tough guy. And one of the reasons that David was explaining why his voters didn't seem to care what he did when he said all these outrageous things is because he was selling himself as a strong man who could go to Washington and fix everything. And who cares if he's a little rough around the edges? And as a matter of fact, I talked to many, many people at Trump rallies who said, well, I don't really like it when he does that, or I think he should be a little more professional. But he says what I'm thinking, and we need somebody to go in there and fix this crappy system and take it away from the corrupt elites. And so they were willing to do that. But I do think it was very gendered. Now, the problem with deciding how much misogyny played a role is because Hillary Clinton was not just the first generic woman running for president. She was a particular woman with a particular history, 30 years of baggage. And many, many people would say, I really want to vote for the first woman. I just don't want to vote for this woman, you know. And maybe it's because having the first African-American president was such a big milestone and shattered such a big barrier that it just didn't seem like that big a deal. I think the thing that's so funny about talking about this is, if whatever it was, 56,000 votes had gone the other way in 3 states, we would be sitting here talking about
the first woman
president. And that is not to take away any legitimacy of his election at all. It's just that what happens is, when there's a very close election, especially when there's a split decision, like now, I mean, you know, legally and according to our rules, he won. But when you have, this is the highest disparity we've ever had in the popular vote, right?
She's gotten more votes than any presidential candidate in history, except for Obama.
Yeah. So in other words, she's going to end up with 2 million, I think, by the time we're finished counting. So when you have that, it doesn't take away anything from his victory, but it shows you that we start rushing to, first of all, learn lessons from this. We draw conclusions, we talk about the white working class, or we talk about what worked and what didn't. We're really not sure. I really believe, after doing this for as long as I've been doing, we're still just groping in the dark. The pollsters can't even make the right models. You know, there's so much that we don't know. And I would say, if anything we bring out of this, it should be humility. I mean, I say in Washington right now, on the menu is crow, with a big side helping of black swan. I mean, you know, we were wrong. And there's even a debate about the exit polls are always debated, because exit polls are terrible, by the way. They're a terrible, flawed thing. Okay.
And then we use them
to
figure out what happened.
To figure out what happened. So there's this big debate, you know, Donald Trump, and you read it every day. Look how much minority votes he got. He should have gotten like 0, or he should have gotten 5% of the Hispanic vote, but he got more than Mitt Romney. Well, there are a lot of Hispanic polling organizations that say that's absolutely not true. First of all, pollsters tend to get higher educated people, to exit pollsters, to talk to them. It's not really random. Anyway, we don't really know how many Hispanic votes he got.
We'll get some better idea when you look at
when we get the actual vote. Right.
We'll know more about it. So talk a little bit about the media.
Oh yeah, the media. The media is not one thing.
Right.
David and I say this over and over again. The media is not one thing. It's all these different organizations. NPR, the Washington Post, the New York Times. We operated in our traditional functions. The cable networks, they have something to answer for. You know, Leslie Moonves, head of CBS, famously said, Donald Trump might be bad for America, but he's damn good for CBS. The blurring of news and entertainment, the ratings bonanza that Donald Trump brought to the cable networks, which caused them to give him, and by one estimate, $3.2 billion more of free airtime than any other candidate, was really a big factor. And so many new and different things happened this year that it's hard to tease them all out and assign proportionate blame to them. And also, it's very hard to get your mind wrapped around it. This is the first campaign that we've ever had a foreign power intervene and disrupt.
That we know of.
That we know of. Okay? This is the first campaign that operated in the new media environment. Granted, social media has been around, but never like it was now, that Donald Trump could, because of his celebrity, dominate free media, we call it news coverage, and social media, just by tweeting up a storm, and this whole onslaught of fake news, which is incredibly disturbing for an old-fashioned journalist. No way to put that genie back in the bottle. I mean, I suppose Facebook and Google could put on some kind of editorial.
Filters.
I mean, they could start understanding that they are the largest publishers on the globe. They're actually a media company. They're not a tech company. Right. But the fact that people will pretty much believe anything that comes into their inbox or is on their news feed, that was new. So all of these things were happening. At the same time, the Republican Party was changing, was coming to a tipping point, which people didn't really realize it until Donald Trump was nominated. All these things happened. And plus, there's a global movement against elites, globalization, trade, immigration, all of that was happening. So it's a lot of stuff to wrap your mind around. But the media has a lot of soul searching to do, and especially, I think, the cable networks.
I mean, it seemed to me that any individual media outlet you can look at, did good work at some point during the campaign, particularly in covering Donald Trump. David Fahrenthold broke these great stories on the Foundation, the Washington Post. The New York Times, figured out that he hadn't paid taxes in 18 years, when they got a leak, and did some good work on the amount of money he owns to Bank of China. And there you could point this out, but I'd have to go back and read everything again. It did seem to me that there was a little bit of an unequal playing field, in that the Hillary Clinton email story just seemed to be always getting lots of coverage, and Trump's conflicts of interest and business dealings, what he wasn't disclosing. He put out his financial disclosure form, which is very vague in a lot of ways, had 500 LLCs on it. LLCs are companies that you basically have a hard time tracing who they are and what they do.
But now they're starting to, and that's why we're finding out about his business.
Now they're starting to.
Yeah.
I mean, Mother
Well, it takes a
Jones,
long time,
we dug into that a lot before the election, but I felt like a lot of that stuff was put to the side with him. And I'm not saying it wouldn't, how much it would have made a difference one way or the other, but I felt because he was kind of, considered almost clownish and a celebrity for a long time without having much of a chance to win, even though he was always leading the Republican race, literally 3 weeks after he entered the race, that there was still just not the same amount of focus. Well, and of course we've seen the media was screaming for months about how she wasn't holding press conferences, which was right.
Yeah, and he hasn't held one.
And he has, and then when he didn't do it basically after getting the nomination, he stopped holding press conferences, and that didn't become as much of a media meme as it was with Hillary. And so, and it's hard to know how these things get started. There's no committee out there deciding all this. These are all separate media entities that are making their own decisions, sometimes by looking at what the other reporters are doing. And it's sort of more of an anthropological question than a conspiratorial one. But I still feel that he got off
no doubt.
easy.
No doubt.
She got, the type of media attention that she's always gotten.
There's first, it's really complicated. First of all, she was held to a higher standard. Why? Because she'd been in public service all these years. He was a businessman, so he was cut a tremendous amount of slack for that. What do you expect? He's not a politician. And he blustered his way through everything. I think the interesting thing is that it shows that you can change the rules if you have, some people would say, no shame. I mean, you can change the rules. Now, the big question for me going forward is, what other rules does he want to change? That's why I'm saying going forward, this is about first principles. This is about democratic institutions and whether he wants to change them. There's going to be legislation introduced in Congress to make it a law that every president has to release his tax returns. Now, every president gets audited. That is true. But I don't know if every president doesn't have to release their tax returns.
No, he has no obligation to release his tax returns. And while every other federal employee is subject to conflict of interest laws,
he's not, the president
is not.
So there's a lot of things he can do legally. But, anyway, so will the Republicans support that? There are tremendous questions now for Republicans. Right now, the rigged system belongs to the Republicans. They own everything. And
they own the swamp.
They own the swamp. They are the swamp. They are the swamp. The media is the only institution he can blame anymore, because there's no more Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. So it'll be really interesting to see, does he want to change the libel laws? Does he want to shut down the internet? What does he think? Does he think no judge can, and there will be other lawsuits. I mean, just because he settled the Trump University one for $25 million, there will be other ones. Yeah. Bill Clinton was sued. I mean, will he want to pass a law to protect the president? Who knows? He has expressed admiration and affection for authoritarian populists around the world. What does he want to do to emulate them? We don't know, but that's what I think this is about going forward.
And the whole thrust of his campaign was, you can just elect me and not have to worry.
Yeah.
You know, Hillary Clinton was basically stronger together,
Yeah.
a communal message.
yeah.
We'll work together
Yeah,
across the things that may
Yeah,
divide
yeah.
us to improve America. He basically said, I can do it.
Yeah.
Only one man can fix
Yes,
things.
only
it's
I.
me.
Yeah.
I will be your strong man. I'll go clean it. I'll drain the swamp, even though you know, my hotel is based in the swamp and charges swamp-like fees.
Well, but more
You know,
importantly,
and now he's
markets
taking money.
itself to diplomats.
Yeah.
That's the more important thing. Markets itself to diplomats. And you have
Yeah.
all these people staying there from all these third world countries who understand how this
All these
systems work,
diplomats are saying,
you know.
oh,
Yeah.
we'll
We're gonna stay there."
gladly pay more than you asked us to
Yeah,
pay,
yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Trump,
yeah.
to stay at your
Yeah.
hotel.
Yeah.
And it's all going to be somewhat legal. But his promise was, don't worry your pretty heads
Yeah.
about anything. I will make America again. I'll bring back jobs. They were big, bold promises, hollow promises. And you know, looking ahead, it remains to be seen how he's going to engage with the Republicans who control Congress, how they will engage with him. Poor Ryan has already said his number one priority is to privatize Medicare. I see a few people in the room here who might have a feeling about that. I know I do, although I'm not there yet. And that was something that Donald Trump didn't talk about. In fact, in years past, he has criticized
on the
Ryan
campaign trail,
for
he said
wanting
he
to-
didn't want to change entitlements.
to do this.
Yeah.
And so now, will he, if they call it Trump Care, will he just sign his name to it?
That
Or
is the
will-
best idea. He should change 2 words
Yeah.
in the bill, call it Trump Care. Republicans will love it.
You know, and so, does he have a set idea about what he wants to do legislatively? Will he put pressure on Republicans to do things they don't want to do? You know, the Tea Party drive that has brought Republicans to power in the House and Senate was driven by supposedly fiscal responsibility, cutting government spending and tax cuts as well. If he wants to spend money on infrastructure and do other things and blow up the budget, are they going to rebel against that? Or are they going to say, whatever you want, Mr.
Yeah,
Trump?
maybe Republicans only care about the deficit when there's a Democrat in the White House.
Yeah,
We're going to find out.
And on foreign policy, he does not have a coherent foreign policy. I mean, he has advisors around him who want to slam Putin, and he's soft on Putin. You know, he talks about how the Iraq War was terrible. Then he talks about putting people who cheerleaded the Iraq War into powers of position, and yet he still wants to slam ISIS while being disengaged in Syria. So there's no coherency, and he's going to have to put a team together of people with these very different conflicting ideas and somehow hope they can work together, and how Congress and the national security experts of the Republican Party, whether it be Lindsey Graham or John McCain or Mitt Romney on the inside or the outside, what are they going to say about this? Are
Well,
they going to go
John
along?
McCain has already made it pretty clear that there's not going to be any torture. I mean, John McCain has kind of gone back to his original McCainness, I guess, and
Well-
he's at least so far he's been the loudest voice against some of the Trump foreign policy plans.
Well, we're going to take some questions now. They want you to go to the mics. So I want to ask students first. If there are a couple students, to go up to the mics. And once you see a few students there, anyone who is not a student can feel free to head up there.
Am I a student?
Okay, you actually...
You
you're
get a
paid-
special pass.
you're
You get a
pa-
special pass.
You paid for that
Yeah.
microphone,
Yeah.
Well,
so
I-
it's yours, so you can ask the first question.
I am going to just interject that this event is being live streamed. So we do welcome you to ask questions, but just recognize that you will be beamed out onto the internet.
Okay, and let's try to keep it as questions. Okay.
You mentioned there's been a lot of ink spilled about fake news recently, and it seems that... Sorry.
Get close to the mic, really.
It seems that we've started living not just in 2 separate ideological universes, but in 2 separate factual universes where no one really agrees on the actual basic truths of American politics. What do you think can be done about that? I know it's a big question.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, you know, you've got like 99% of scientists saying global warming's causes are mostly man-made. You've got Donald Trump who says global warming is a hoax made up by the Chinese. Now you have the Chinese saying, no, actually,
We think it's real.
We think it's real. We think it's real. That would be kind of amazing if the Global Climate Pact is now going to depend on China instead of American leadership. But anyway, I don't know what you do. I think it's really tough. When you have 44% of Republicans think Barack Obama was not born in the United States. That means they think he was constitutionally ineligible to be president. I don't know what you do about that. That's been, to me, one of the most disturbing things, the fake news thing. And also, the idea, once you have fake news, then all news is fake.
Yeah.
You know, once you, and that is the true strategy of Vladimir Putin. In other words, what it's been described to me by Russian experts is the first thing you do is you destabilize, you know, the information. That, you know, that's what propaganda does. You make everything suspect. You can't agree. You don't think your ballot box is secure because you know that Russia has tampered with it and has stolen emails and has hacked. Even if they can't tamper with the ballot box, they succeeded in making everyone think that they could. And then the fake news stuff. You don't know what you're getting in your Facebook news feed. Is it from the Russians? Is it from some Macedonian teenagers trying to make money? You just have no way of knowing. Now, maybe if Facebook and Google, who I think have a tremendous responsibility now, they have tremendous power and a tremendous responsibility. Let's see what they can come up with to you know, differentiate between.
I mean,
between
the
fake
interesting
and real.
thing is, some of us in this room are old enough to remember when the media had gatekeepers, and like there were only 3 network news shows and a couple of newspapers. And the people who were the managing editors of those enterprises decided what was news and what wasn't news. Now, there was a good side to that and a bad side to that. There were massacres in El Salvador that, you know, weren't covered because the editor of the New York Times thought they didn't really happen because he believed Reagan administration officials as opposed to his own reporters on the ground. And so that was the bad thing. But it did give us a common set of facts to talk about. And now, when everything is so nichified and diversified, it's really hard. And you can find literally anything on the internet. And so what was even more bizarre about Donald Trump saying that climate change was a Chinese hoax was then when Hillary Clinton said, well, you said that climate change was a Chinese hoax. He said, no, I didn't, even though he had tweeted that. So it was like double, triple meta. In terms of post-factual, it was post-factual, and all I can say at this point for those of us in the information business is it's just going to be an incredibly uphill struggle, and we can hope that, you know, there's some structural changes at Facebook and Google that slow down the spread of fake news. But it's really going to, you know, a lot of it's going to have to depend on having a great education system, which we don't have across this country. Let's go.
Thank you both for coming. I really appreciate it. As someone who identifies as disabled, I know that there's like a huge, mostly like silent, I guess, population that it's something like a third of the country that either is disabled or is a caregiver for someone who's disabled. And it was really strange to me that Hillary Clinton and her team didn't try to appeal to the demographic after.
She actually did. She really made that a real
You
point.
mean about the
outreach.
mocking of the
No,
disabled
no,
report?
no. But she did events with disabled groups, and I think they actually targeted disabled people.
I never saw it.
Well, that's interesting because I know that they did try, and they
Yeah.
identified disabled people, and of course they sliced and diced the entire electorate into tiny little pieces. But they had outreach to Hispanics and LGBT and African Americans and disabled. They definitely had an effort. Maybe it just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wonder if it's sort of like the last taboo identity. So I don't know. I don't know if
Well,
you think.
I mean, I do. You know, some of her ads did focus on Trump mocking
definitely.
the disabled reporter, which was obviously a way to get people who care about this issue on her side. So you know, that was a pretty prominent.
Yeah, and they had the parents with the
Talking point.
disabled child watching the TV and
That was
watching
her
him.
first
Yeah, they
campaign
had-
ad. Now the
yeah.
thing is, I assume you were in Providence for most of the campaign.
You wouldn't have seen any of
You
these,
wouldn't have seen a
'cause
lot
you're
of
not
this.
a battleground state.
They played on 7, 8,
Yeah.
9, 10 states.
Yeah.
And so those efforts are targeted, like, so the campaign ads that focused on that as a theme. They didn't waste
Yeah.
money buying them in Boston or Providence.
Yeah, I mean, I saw like a lot of think pieces about like how Trump was in trouble with women, but nothing about how he was in trouble with disabled people.
Well, I think you're probably right that I think in terms of the media conception of that as a voting bloc, you're probably right. I don't think a lot of people in the media thought that way, that that's a voting bloc in and of itself. I met a lot of conservatives, actually, who were never Trumpers, and that was what did it. They were people who had disabled folks
Yeah.
in their family. It became very real. But I think you're right that maybe less so for her campaign, but as campaigns write about this and when they're looking, I mean, media is writing and covering this, what they're looking for, they may not see that block as an identifiable block the way we see other traditional blocks. That's a good point. Thank you.
You reference these parallel calls for news organizations to, one, lend greater scrutiny towards Trump's statements in proportion to their controversy as opposed to sort of equally focusing on Clinton's emails and everything that Trump said, but also, two, to stop giving Trump that $3.2 billion in free press coverage. Can you go into greater detail on how those two interests can be reconciled?
Well, I think that the $3.2 billion of free coverage came mostly during the primaries, where what they did is they just covered him without any context. They basically would just roll on his events. And sometimes they would roll on an empty podium waiting for him to come. There'd be chatter, or his plane landing. You know, so he got he got a tremendous amount of unfiltered coverage. And the same thing with that's what tweeting is. He gets to say whatever he wants. So he dominated social media, he dominated free media. He understood the changing media environment. She didn't understand it as well. She also wasn't as comfortable. You know, the fact that she did not do press conferences for such a long time. She also left the trail in August to do a lot of fundraising. But in terms of making sure they were equally covered, you know, somebody I'm sure is doing a study on this. I really wonder if during the general election, I bet they did get covered equally in terms of the number of like inches or minutes to their various problems.
Well, maybe, but she had had a year, if not 30
at least
years.
30 years.
Of
See,
that
was also,
time.
she was somebody with a long track record, and he, well, except for The Apprentice, but as a politician, he was brand new. So, you know, I don't know how you would have equalized that, except for to treated him seriously more earlier.
That's what,
And treated him like a regular politician instead of like this phenomenon, this reality TV billionaire. You know, hold him to the same rules. Maybe it would have made a difference. I don't know.
Maybe not,
Yeah.
but I think earlier application of fact checking
Yeah, I agree.
while you're showing his speeches might have helped a little bit.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm just like looking at a more global trend of
Speak
like.
right into the mic.
So I'm seeing like more of like a global trend in like rise of like populist movement around the world, and I'm just like wondering like why now?
Because I think that we've had wage stagnation for a long time. In other words, a lot of the trends that have been around for a long time have finally all come together. First of all, there is, you know, the consequences of another president, George W. Bush. You know, the Middle East has been on fire. Tremendous numbers of refugees are
Yeah.
flowing into Europe. So there's resentment of immigration there. In the United States, and here's the great irony of all of this, a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump ran against actually barely exists. Net illegal immigration over the Mexican border is
Yeah.
at zero and has been. Wages are finally starting to go up. You know, ISIS is actually probably going to be, at least in Iraq and Syria, is going to be, you know, pretty much eradicated. They have cells elsewhere. But so all this stuff that was good, but just hadn't been around long enough for people to feel it, he'll get to take credit for it. When it happens. So, but in terms of why now, I think that you know, globalization has taken its toll, and it's been now a generation. You know, you've had wage stagnation for a long time. You've got, you know, for a generation, people aren't doing better than their parents, which is kind of a fundamental part of the American dream. And I think the demographics are starting to reach a tipping point. You know, we have had the first majority minority kindergarten class, so that's not going away. Plus, you have gridlock in Washington. You have a generation of Republicans who have told their white working class base, they've courted them with social issues, whether it's guns, gay rights, abortion, gay marriage, school prayer, et cetera, et cetera. They always had a message for those voters, but they never had an economic program for them. And finally, along comes Donald Trump.
And you had
speaks to them.
expectations raised
Yes.
by Obama.
Yes, and expectations raised by Obama.
Expectations were very high, and so it's like a gathering of storm forces, and it could have, it also could have happened 4 years ago had somebody, put a match to the fuse, which he did. So it may have happened 8 years ago too. These are long-term trends that have been around. But I do think, the war in the Middle East is crucial to this,
just
because
millions of people on the
it created this tremendous,
Yeah.
freak out
Yeah.
in Europe, and has contributed to Brexit and got sort of the ball rolling here. So a lot of different factors, and I don't know, and you have the rise of the white nationalist movement in America, which voted for Trump and is celebrating
Well,
Trump
it's
quite
been
openly.
around, that movement
Yeah.
has been around for a long time.
But
They
the-
finally
yeah,
fenced it.
but through
But
the
in
inter-
Europe, you've got all
Yeah.
these parties that are, authoritarian, populist, anti-immigrant parties. But, the other thing to think about in terms of why now, maybe Donald Trump was just this year's version of Barack Obama. Because every election since 2000, with the exception of 2012, has been a change election, meaning one house of Congress or both or the White House has changed party control. So voters keep on voting for change. They just never get the change they want, so they keep on voting for change.
Yeah.
So, they voted for Barack Obama. Now 2012 was a status quo election. That was the exception. But we've had a lot of volatility, a lot, because people are unhappy. Now, another reason for that is gridlock in Washington, because they keep on voting for change and they don't get anything changing and they see all these big problems. Why can't the two parties in Washington do something about our crumbling infrastructure or our education system or our tax system or healthcare, or whatever? And the two parties in Washington are so perfectly polarized. And of course, the irony of this election, where Donald Trump actually ran on a non-ideological platform. He has the potential to kind of burst the paradigms of both parties and come out with this big jobs plan for infrastructure, maybe. So that, and he doesn't care about social issues really, even though he signed on the dotted line to the evangelical right.
Yeah.
He went farther than any Republican nominee on that sense, because he had to. But, so...
I would say,
yeah.
I would take a little bit of a sharper or different view and say that part of this too is part of a long-term, I'll call it a Republican plan, I'm not saying it's a conscious plan, in which the Republican Party has, you can go back to the Southern strategy in the 60s if you want to, but certainly over the last 8 years and before that, have really put racial resentment and fear and catering to the Tea Party, which had a racial component to it. The whole birther movement was tied in with the Tea Party, and the Republicans thought they could ride this to victory, and they really got their base exercised after a black guy was elected president, about whether he was illegitimate, and they talked about, and anything that came up that he did, they couldn't just disagree. Obamacare? No, it was death panels. The stimulus bill, Eric Cantor, the majority leader in the House, said it didn't create one new job. You can't spend $3 billion and not create one new job, as Ed told me last night. Even the guys who make the sign, it's a new job for them. So, they really took a base that was angry for lots of different reasons, some cultural, some racial, some economic, and they made a toxic brew that was ready for Donald Trump, and they encouraged this, and it's kind of devoured the Republicans who used to want to do deals and do legislation. John Boehner, when he was Speaker, he was caught on tape complaining, making fun of his own members of the House that they couldn't pass an immigration bill, and he would say, "They're such whiners. That's so hard." Well, that's because he couldn't pass it because of the hyperbolic and I would say hate-driven messaging they were sending out to the Tea Party base. So, but when Republicans and Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann, two very centrist think tankers, wrote a great book a year or two back, basically it's not both sides' fault. When the Republicans discredit government, when they bring about gridlock, it's what they want. They want people outside of Washington to look at Washington and hate Washington because they don't want to pass Obamacare. They haven't wanted to do an infrastructure bill before now. They didn't want to do the stimulus. They didn't want to do the auto bailout or rescue bill. And so it's asymmetrical warfare, and it's a story I think Obama had a hard time dealing with, and it's a hard story for, and I understand, for people outside of Washington to look at when it's just easy to blame both sides. My speech is done. Let's go to you.
I've been seeing a lot of stuff across my news feed about the Electoral College and about, we should petition for them to vote Hillary Clinton into office or we should abolish it. And I'm wondering, is there any reality to any of this stuff?
There actually is a tiny bit of reality. First of all, no, there's no reality to getting electors to vote for Hillary Clinton. That is not going to happen. However, and what's really interesting is now people will understand what the Electoral College is, and I assume that it will become a focal point for organizing on the left because it's Exhibit A for a rigged system. Perfectly legal, but boy, that is, if you want to know what a rigged system is, it's the Electoral College. And we can go into the origins of it, et cetera. But there actually is a movement to neuter it. You could never get it abolished because you need a constitutional amendment for that. But there is a bill, it's called the Electoral College National Popular Vote Compact or something like that. And 11 states have passed it, and what it is these, and those 11 states have 165 electoral votes between them, and they pass a law that says our electors can never vote against the national popular vote. So even if our state goes the other way, our electors have to vote for it, so there never will be a disparity like you see today.
And the thing is, once you get, you don't need every state.
Yeah, you need 270.
You get enough states that represent 270 electoral votes who agree to this, because the states determine how their electors are chosen. Then you have a popular vote system.
But the reason why that will not happen anytime soon is because...
Demographics.
Well, demographics, but also because Democrats only control the two state legislative bodies and the governor's mansions in 5 states right now. This is the other thing that we have to talk about. No president in American history has presided over a bigger loss of seats nationwide, from every level, from dog catcher to president, than Barack Obama. In other words, the Democrats have fewer elected offices now than at any time since the 1920s. Every president loses seats for his party, but no president has lost as many seats. So they have a long road back in the political wilderness. Now, they kept on winning presidential elections, so that kind of, for a while we thought, Republicans can never get enough minority votes to win the White House, and Democrats can never get enough white votes to win the House of Representatives. But now Donald Trump has shown that. And just one other little thing. I asked a lot of Republicans before Election Day, which is better for the long-term health of the Republican Party, for Trump to win or lose? And you would be surprised how many prominent Republicans, and I'm not talking about never-Trumpers, people whose names I will not mention here because it was all off the record, said, oh, of course it would be better if he loses. Why? Well, I guess they assumed that his presidency would be such an unmitigated disaster. Now, we don't know. We're just at the beginning. But that's what they thought. Right now, they're all like, holy moly, we caught the car.
Exactly.
We didn't think he was going to get keep the Senate and keep our losses in the House to 6. Now let's see if they can drive.
We have a few minutes left, so let's try to do questions real quick so we can squeeze everybody in.
Just 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, you.
Yeah, my question is, what does the Democratic Party do next? Do they continue to focus on the kind of Obama coalition, or do they shift their focus to like the white working class in Michigan and Wisconsin?
You have to do both, and I think every Democrat will say that. I don't think there's any Democrat standing up right now and saying they have to do one or the other. I mean, first of all, that would be insane.
And they don't have to win all the votes Trump got. They have a majority already. They need to eat into that, create a buffer zone.
Just the reason she lost, one of the reasons, in those counties, those white rural counties where Trump was able to get the turnout up and win tremendous 69% of the white non-college vote, Barack Obama used to lose those counties with 43% of the vote. He never won them, but he kept his head above water so he could run up the big margins in the inner city and the suburbs and the ring counties. She lost those counties by like 37, 36. You can't stay alive when you're losing white rural votes by that much. So in other words, they just have to do better. Yeah. Just like the flip side is true for the Republicans. Remember how they say, we don't have to win the Hispanic vote. We just can't lose it so badly. Yeah. So that's the goal for Democrats. They have to come up with a message, and they should. First of all, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are not from the Obama electorate wing of the party. They're the lunch bucket Democrats. In other words, they have an economic message first and foremost. Their message isn't about liberal identity politics. Theirs is it's an economic message. And Democrats have been through this before. I don't know if they can do the same thing, but Bill Clinton went out to woo the Reagan Democrats back. All those white working class voters who flipped to Reagan, Bill Clinton went out and got them back.
Now, the interesting thing, he used race a bit to do that as well.
A little bit, but nothing compared to what we
no,
saw.
That's Trump, but that was...
the white Sister Souljah and stuff like that, and welfare reform. But you know what, though? You can make an argument that wasn't just a racial argument. That was a reform, whatever. But you know what? You can argue about that but I haven't heard a single Democrat say they have to choose.
Okay, let's go.
Hi there. My name is actually also Mara. And quick side note, my parents are huge NPR fans, and you were the inspiration for my name.
Oh, that's so great.
Oh, there you go.
That's so great.
So I just have two quick questions.
No, one quick question.
Okay, I'll ask the second one then. Just for the brand students in the room, I was wondering if you could comment on like a class or an experience you had that you thought was integral to your development as an aspiring journalist here.
I majored in American history, which I think was absolutely key. I studied with John Thomas, who no longer is alive. He was a wonderful guy. He was incredible, and I wrote my thesis with him. And to me, study history. And learn how to write. Those are the two things.
Quick last question.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. I just have a question. I work in media, and I've noticed a lot of media outlets are really hesitant or kind of tiptoe around the word racism, and will say things like racial tension instead, or will cover racism in such a way that it's like a debate, they're trying to cover it, like there's two sides to it. And I'm curious if you all think, especially with this election, do you think that that's a productive way to cover this? And if not, I also am curious, how, if we need to be more explicit about that, like how can we cover it in such a way that we're not alienating people who, are unaware of America's history of racism or are kind of reluctant to, because that term is really charged.
Well, you'd hear Trump say, coverage of Trump often, he used racially charged language, rather than saying he's a racist or that it's a racist statement.
I think saying somebody's a racist is a really unproductive thing. Because nobody knows what's in somebody's heart. All we know is what they said and did. That's enough. Let's talk about what they said and did. Whether Steve Bannon is a racist, I don't really care. I'm not interested. I want to know what his website said, and what was on Breitbart, and and there was clear white supremacist, white nationalism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, whatever. But I do think that it's always a mistake to call somebody's voters racist. They certainly resented that, and some of them might be white nationalists. But I can only say one tiny little example of something that NPR has done recently. Our editor decided that we're not going to use the term alt-right.
Good for you.
Why should we? It sounds like a rock band, and it doesn't mean anything. We say white nationalism or white supremacism or whatever it is we're talking about on that website. Alt-right, that's like, anyway. That's one little thing. I can give you an example.
Well, I think that's it, right, Ed?
Yeah. Maybe I'll just say in
I
closing.
feel so bad for these guys.
Sorry. Come talk to us.
In closing, to the extent that we believe that the Donald Trump victory represented an insurgency against the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, what that seems to suggest, and I think this is part of the tenor of the conversation, is that the system, many global systems and the American system, are open right now for ideas. And there is a vacuum that's been created and a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction and anger, and that does call for free-ranging debate and many ideas. I think fora such as this suggests that Brown University and the Watson Institute, certainly inside Brown, is a place that aspires to be that kind of forum for many different ideas in a nonpartisan, although if you're partisan, that's fine, but we'll convene these in a nonpartisan manner. And I really want to thank Mara Liasson for setting such a great tone and educating us today, and David Korn for leading us throughout this semester and educating us. And thank you all for participating in this conversation.